They say the hardest thing about working for 30 years isn't the early mornings or the sore back, it's the hope you carry that one day it will all be worth it. I spent 3 decades at Morrison Engineering, giving them my sweat, my weekends, and more missed family dinners than I care to count. I thought I was building a castle for my wife and me to grow old in, but I found out the hard way that while I was out there building the walls, she was inside digging a tunnel to sneak everything out from under me. Imagine walking into your own home with a $3 million check in your pocket, ready to change your life forever, only to hear the woman you love planning how to take every penny of it before you even have the chance to say hello. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 62 years old, and for most of those years I thought I was a pretty lucky man. I had a good job, a beautiful house with a big oak staircase, and a wife named Linda who I'd been married to for 28 years. That morning life felt perfect. I was in my boss Frank's office, and he was shaking my hand with tears in his eyes. He handed me my retirement package, a total of $3.2 million. It was more than I ever expected. It was the prize at the end of a long, hard race. I remember looking at that signed paper, thinking about all the 12-hour days and the stress, and feeling like it was finally over. I was free. I grabbed my briefcase, my little gold watch they gave me, and a plaque for my years of service. I was buzzing with energy like a kid on the last day of school. I wanted to surprise Linda. I wanted to see her eyes light up when I told her she never had to worry about a bill ever again. I drove home 2 hours early, humming along to the radio, picturing us on a beach in Italy or maybe buying that mountain cabin she always talked about. I pulled into our driveway, seeing the house we'd bought back in 1997, the place where we raised our kids and made all our memories. I used my key, turned the lock as quietly as I could, and stepped into the foyer. I was going to tiptoe up the stairs and surprise her. But as I stood there at the bottom of that big oak staircase, the same one where we took our Christmas photos every year, I heard her voice coming from the bedroom upstairs. She wasn't talking to me. She was on the phone. I froze. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but her tone was cold, sharp, and businesslike. It wasn't the voice of the woman who kissed me goodbye that morning. She said, "Don't worry, once the divorce is final, we'll have at least half of that, maybe more if his lawyer is incompetent." The world just stopped. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. I stood there, clutching my briefcase, staring at the wood grain of the stairs. I remembered carrying her over the threshold of this house when we first moved in. I remembered the laughter and the tears we'd shared on these very steps. And now she was upstairs talking about a divorce like she was planning a grocery list. She was talking about half of that. She didn't even know about the 3.2 million yet, or did she? I didn't go up there. I didn't scream or throw my plaque through the window. Something inside me just went numb. It was like my engineering brain took over. If there's a leak in the dam, you don't just stand there and yell at the water. You find out where the hole is. I quietly turned around, walked back out the front door, and got into my car. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. I drove to a little coffee shop about 3 miles away, a place where nobody knew me, and I just sat there in a corner booth with a cup of black coffee that I couldn't even taste. For the next hour, my mind was a mess. I replayed the last year of our marriage over and over. Had I been that blind? I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Linda had been going to the gym 5 days a week lately. She'd gotten a fancy new haircut and bought a whole new wardrobe of clothes that seemed a bit too young for her. And then there was the phone. About 6 months ago, she put a password on her phone for the first time. When I asked her about it, she just laughed and called me old-fashioned. I believed her because I wanted to. I trusted her because that's what you do after 28 years. But sitting in that coffee shop, I realized I'd been living with a stranger. Then a thought hit me like a ton of bricks. How did she know about the money? The official retirement announcement wasn't supposed to go out to the whole company until the next day. The only people who knew the exact numbers were me, Frank, and the folks in HR. If Linda was talking about at least half, she knew I was coming into a big payday. Someone had talked. I pulled out my phone and called Dave. Dave worked in the IT department at Morrison, and we'd been buddies for a long time. I kept my voice as steady as I could, though my stomach was doing backflips. I asked him, "Dave, I need a huge favor. Can you check who's been looking at my personnel file in the last 24 hours? I think there might be a glitch with my retirement paperwork, Dave hesitated. He knew that was against the rules, but I told him it was life or death. 10 minutes later, he called me back. He sounded nervous. He told me that my file had been accessed the day before by a woman named Margaret Chin in the HR department. But that wasn't all. He said the file had been forwarded to an external email address. He gave me the name, David Thompson at Thompson Financial Consulting. I thanked Dave and hung up, then I pulled up Google on my phone. I typed in that name and there he was. David Thompson. A guy in his early 40s, white teeth, expensive suit, looking like he just stepped off a yacht. His website said he specialized in asset protection and divorce financial advising. It was right there in plain English. He wasn't just a money guy, he was a guy you hire when you want to make sure your husband or wife gets as little as possible in a breakup. The pieces started falling into place and it made me sick. Margaret Chin from HR must have been in on it. I didn't know her well, but I knew she'd been with the company for a few years. She'd seen my retirement package, saw the 3.2 million, and she'd leaked it to this Thompson guy. And Linda? Linda was already talking to him. They weren't just waiting for me to retire, they were waiting for the money to be official so they could pounce. I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, watching the steam rise off my cold coffee. I felt like I was at a crossroads. I could go home right now, walk into that bedroom, and demand to know what was going on. I could show her the pictures of Thompson and the email logs from Dave. But then what? She'd just call her lawyer and the war would start and I'd be the one caught off guard. She had a head start. She'd been planning this while I was still working overtime to provide for her. If I wanted to save my life's work, I couldn't be the nice guy anymore. I couldn't be the husband who just let things slide. I had to be the engineer. I had to look at this like a project. I had to gather data, build a defense, and make sure that when the collapse happened, I wasn't the one buried under the rubble. I realized that Linda didn't know that I knew. She thought I was still her clueless, hard-working husband who would come home, kiss her on the cheek, and hand over the keys to the kingdom. That was my only advantage. She thought I was a sheep, but I was about to become the shepherd of my own future. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked out to my car. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the kind of person who could go toe-to-toe with a guy like David Thompson. I spent the next hour driving to the next town over, far away from anyone who might recognize me or my car. I found a small law office with a sign that just said, Patricia Morrison Family Law. No relation to my company, just a coincidence. When I walked into her office, I must have looked like a ghost. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a suit that looked like it cost more than my first car. She didn't waste time with small talk. I sat down and told her everything, the 30 years, the 3.2 million, the oak staircase, the phone call, Margaret Chin, and David Thompson. I told her I wanted to protect what was mine, but more than that, I wanted to know how the woman I loved could do this to me. Patricia listened without interrupting once. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked me straight in the eye. She told me, Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to be very honest with you. Your wife isn't just planning a divorce. She's planning a heist. And if you don't play this perfectly, she's going to win. She explained that in a long marriage like ours, the law usually likes to split things down the middle. But because I hadn't actually received the money yet, the papers were signed but the transfer wouldn't happen for another 30 days, we had a window of time. She told me I had to go home and act like nothing was wrong. I had to be the same Robert I'd always been. I had to eat her dinner, watch TV with her, and sleep in the same bed, all while knowing she was waiting for me to be incompetent enough to lose everything. It's going to be the hardest 30 days of your life, Patricia said. But if you can do it, we can build a wall around that money that she can't climb over. I left her office with a list of things to do. I had to document everything. I had to keep a log of her movements. I had to hire a private investigator to see just how deep this thing with David Thompson went. And most importantly, I couldn't tell a soul. Not my friends, not my kids, nobody. I drove back home as the sun was starting to set. I pulled into the driveway and saw the lights on in the kitchen. I could see Linda through the window moving around, probably making the lasagna she knew I liked. For a second, I wanted to believe it was all a mistake. I wanted to believe I'd misheard her or that Dave was wrong about the email. But then I remembered the coldness in her voice. Maybe more if his lawyer is incompetent. I took a minute in the car to steady my breathing. I practiced my smile in the rearview mirror. I checked to make sure my eyes didn't look too red. Then, I grabbed my briefcase and my gold watch and I walked through that front door for the second time that day. Robert? Is that you? She called out from the kitchen. Her voice was sweet, full of that fake warmth that I now realized was just a mask. "Yeah, honey, it's me," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. She came around the corner and gave me a big hug. She smelled like the perfume I'd bought her for her last birthday. She looked at the plaque in my hand and beamed. "Oh, look at that. 30 years. I'm so proud of you, Robert. You finally did it. You're retired." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the lie behind her eyes. She wasn't proud of my hard work. She was proud that the bird had finally brought the golden egg home to the nest so she could steal it. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was breaking my face. "I finally did it. Everything is going to change now, Linda. Everything." We sat down to dinner and she talked about the future. She talked about trips to Europe and how we should maybe look at some new furniture for the living room. I nodded and agreed, even though every bite of lasagna felt like swallowing dry sand. I watched her hands as she ate, the same hands I'd held when our children were born, and I wondered when they had turned into the hands of a thief. That night, I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the sound of her breathing, steady and calm. She wasn't bothered by what she was doing. She wasn't losing sleep over the betrayal. She was sleeping like a baby, dreaming of the millions she thought were coming her way. But I wasn't sleeping. I was thinking about Patricia's words. I was thinking about the private investigator I was going to hire tomorrow. I was thinking about the 30-day countdown that had just begun. I had been a builder all my life, but for the next month I was going to be an architect of a different kind. I was going to build a trap, and I was going to watch as the woman I thought I knew walked right into it. This was the end of Robert Mitchell, the husband. But it was the beginning of Robert Mitchell, the man who was going to take his life back. The surprise I'd planned for her that morning was nothing compared to the surprise that was coming her way in 30 days. And as I finally closed my eyes, the last thing I thought about wasn't the money or the house. It was the truth. The truth is a heavy thing, but once you know it, it's the only thing that can set you free. Living a lie is a lot like holding your breath underwater. At first, you're just focused on the silence and the weird way the light hits the surface, but after a minute, your lungs start to burn. You realize that the world above is moving on without you, and you're stuck in this cold, quiet place where every second feels like an hour. That was my life for the next week. I had to go back into that house every night, sit across from the woman I'd loved for nearly 3 decades, and pretend that my heart wasn't lying in pieces on the floor. I had to smile when she talked about our future, even though I knew she was already busy erasing me from it. It's one thing to be cheated on. It's another thing entirely to watch the person you trust most in the world try to pick your pockets while they're hugging you. The morning after I met Patricia, the lawyer, I didn't go to the golf course like I told Linda I would. Instead, I drove to a gravel parking lot on the edge of town to meet a man named Marcus Shaw. Patricia had given me his number. She told me he was a former police detective who didn't talk much but got the job done. Marcus was a big guy, probably in his late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of an old tree trunk. He wore a faded baseball cap and sat in a nondescript silver SUV that smelled like stale coffee and old upholstery. I climbed into the passenger seat, feeling like I was in a spy movie, which felt ridiculous for a 62-year-old engineer who usually spends his time worrying about bridge stress and concrete density. I handed Marcus a folder with everything I had. I gave him Linda's schedule, when she went to the gym where she got her hair done, and the names of her friends. I gave him the name David Thompson and the information about Margaret Chin from HR. Marcus didn't say much. He just flipped through the pages with thick, calloused fingers and nodded. I asked him how much it would cost, and he gave me a number that made me wince, but I didn't care. I told him I wanted everything. I wanted to know where she went, who she talked to, and exactly what she was doing when she thought I was busy being a retired old man. He just looked at me with these tired eyes and said, "I'll find it, Mr. Mitchell. People like this always leave a trail. They think they're smarter than everyone else, and that's usually their first mistake." Driving home after that meeting was one of the strangest experiences of my life. I passed by the grocery store where we always shopped. I passed the park where I used to take the kids to play soccer. Everything looked the same, but it all felt fake. It was like I was walking through a movie set where the buildings were just painted plywood and the people were just actors. I pulled into our driveway and saw Linda in the front yard, pruning the rose bushes. She looked so normal. She was wearing her gardening gloves and a big sun hat. She waved at me with a huge smile, and for a split second I wanted to believe it was all a dream. I wanted to run up to her, tell her about the money, and have her jump into my arms like she did when we were 25. But then I remembered the voice on the stairs. "Once the divorce is final, we'll have at least half." The memory was like a bucket of ice water over my head. Inside the house, I started my new job. Patricia told me to document everything, so I bought a small notebook that I kept hidden in my workshop in the garage. I started writing down the time she left and the time she came back. I noted when she was on her phone and how she would turn the screen away if I walked into the room. It felt dirty, like I was the one doing something wrong. I'd spent 30 years being an honest man, a guy who followed the rules and expected others to do the same. Now I was a spy in my own living room. The hardest part was the retirement lunches. My old colleagues at Morrison Engineering kept calling to take me out. They wanted to celebrate old Rob and his big payday. I had to sit there in these nice restaurants, listening to them talk about how lucky I was, while I felt like the unluckiest man on earth. Frank, my boss, sat next to me at one of these lunches and slapped me on the back. He told me he was glad the company was taking care of me. He said, "You and Linda are going to have the best years of your life now, Rob. You earned it." I just nodded and took a sip of my water, feeling a lump in my throat so big I could barely swallow. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to tell someone. But I knew that if the word got out, Margaret Chin in HR would hear about it, and she'd tell Thompson, and the whole plan would fall apart. A few days later, Marcus called me. He told me to meet him at a diner about 40 miles away. When I got there, he was sitting in a back booth with a manila envelope. He didn't say a word, just pushed the envelope across the table. I opened it, and the first thing I saw was a photo of Linda. She was at an outdoor cafe in Richmond, laughing. Sitting across from her was David Thompson. He looked exactly like his picture on the website, slick, handsome, and about 20 years younger than me. In the photo, his hand was resting on hers. I felt a hot flash of anger move through my body, the kind of heat that makes your ears ring. Marcus started pointing at the photos. They met at the cafe at noon. Then they drove separately to a hotel about 10 minutes away. I stayed in the lobby. They were in there for 3 hours. This wasn't the first time, Mr. Mitchell. My sources say they've been seen there at least once a week for the last couple of months. I kept flipping through the pictures. There was one of them in the hotel parking lot. They were kissing. Not a quick goodbye kiss, but the kind of kiss you see in the movies. It was like someone had punched me in the gut. Seeing it in black and white made it real in a way that the phone call hadn't. My wife, the woman who had sat next to me at my mother's funeral, the woman who had held my hand when I was worried about losing my job 10 years ago, was in a hotel room with a divorce consultant while I was at work. "There's more," Marcus said, his voice low. He pulled out some documents. "I followed the money. Your wife hasn't just been talking to him. She's been paying him. She opened a separate bank account 6 months ago. She's been funneling small amounts of money from your joint savings into it. It wasn't enough for you to notice. A couple hundred here, a 500 there, but it adds up. She's already paid Thompson a retainer of $10,000. I leaned back in the booth, feeling dizzy. $10,000. That was money we'd saved for our grandson's college fund. She was using our family's future to pay a guy to help her steal our family's past. It was so calculated. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a business plan. And the HR woman? I asked, my voice shaking. Marcus nodded. Margaret Chin. It turns out she's Thompson's cousin. That's how the connection started. Thompson gets his clients by having people like Margaret look for guys like you, guys who are about to hit a big payday or retire with a massive pension. They target high-value marriages that are hit a rough patch. Margaret finds the targets, Thompson moves in to consult the wives, and they split the loot. It's a racket, Rob. A professional one. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just an affair, it was an industry. I was a target. My 30 years of hard work was just a high-value asset to be harvested. I felt a strange sense of clarity then. The sadness didn't go away, but it was joined by a very cold, very sharp sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let my life's work go into the pocket of a guy who kissed other men's wives in hotel parking lots. I went home that night and Linda was waiting for me with a glass of wine. She was acting extra sweet. She told me she'd been looking at travel brochures for Italy. She sat on the arm of my chair and leaned in close. Robert, she said, her voice like honey. I was thinking, since you're retiring, we should really look at our finances. We need to make sure everything is in both our names, you know? Just in case something happens. And that retirement package, we should probably put that into a joint account as soon as it clears. It'll make things easier for our travel plans. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my wife. I saw a predator. I saw the woman in the Richmond cafe. I saw the woman who had already paid $10,000 to ruin me. You're right, honey, I said, and I actually managed to sound like I meant it. We should definitely make sure everything is handled. I'm still waiting on the final numbers from the company, though. You know how HR is, they move like snails. Oh, I know, she said with a little laugh. But I'm sure it'll be a lot. You've worked so hard. That night, I did something I never thought I'd do. Patricia had told me that Virginia is a one-party consent state, which basically means you can record a conversation as long as one person in the room knows it's being recorded, and that person could be me. I bought a high-quality voice recorder that looked like a USB thumb drive. I tucked it into the pocket of my bathrobe and left it on the chair in the bathroom. Linda always took her phone into the bathroom to listen to music while she showered. I sat on the bed and waited. I heard the water start. Then through the door, I heard the faint sound of her voice. She wasn't singing. She was talking. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew who was on the other end. After she came out, she was glowing. She was humming a little tune and being very affectionate. It made me want to get sick. The next morning, while she was at her gym class, I grabbed the recorder. I sat in my workshop in the garage with my headphones on. The audio was clear. The last 3 days before the money was supposed to hit my account felt like walking through a house that was on fire, but I had to pretend I didn't smell the smoke. I woke up every morning, looked at Linda, and felt a deep, cold sadness that I can't even describe. It wasn't just that she was leaving me, it was that she was trying to destroy me while she did it. I'd spend my mornings in my workshop, not actually building anything, just running my hands over the wood and waiting for the clock to tick. I was a man who had spent 30 years designing bridges that wouldn't collapse, and now I was designing the collapse of my own marriage. On the morning of the day the money was supposed to clear, I got up at 5 o'clock. Linda was still fast asleep, looking peaceful, which almost made me laugh. How could someone sleep so soundly when they were planning a robbery? I made a pot of coffee and sat in the kitchen, watching the sun come up over the backyard. I looked at the patio furniture we'd bought together and the bird feeder I'd built for her 3 years ago. It's funny how objects don't change even when your whole world does. To the birds, it was just another Tuesday. To me, it was the day I'd either save my future or lose everything I'd ever worked for. I'd already told Linda I had to go into the office one last time to sign some boring HR exit papers. She didn't even blink. She just told me to have a good day and reminded me that we were going to look at those new sofas later that afternoon. I kissed her on the cheek, and I remember thinking, this is the last time I will ever touch this woman as her husband. It felt like kissing a statue. I drove straight to the Morrison Federal Credit Union. I didn't go to the drive-thru. I walked right inside. I'd already talked to the branch manager, a guy named Steve who I'd known for 20 years. Patricia had sent over all the legal documents for the Robert Mitchell Retirement Trust the day before. Everything was ready. All we were waiting for was the ping from the main office. I sat in Steve's office, clutching a paper cup of water. My heart was thumping so hard against my ribs I thought Steve could probably see it through my shirt. We sat there talking about nothing, the weather, the local high school football team, while Steve kept refreshing his computer screen. Every time he clicked that mouse, my stomach did a somersault. Then, at exactly 9:15 a.m., Steve stopped talking. He looked at the screen, leaned in, and then looked at me with a small smile. It's there, Rob. $3,200,000. Every cent of it. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a month. But the job wasn't done yet. Move it, I said. Now. Steve's fingers flew across the keyboard. Because Patricia had set up the trust as a completely separate entity with its own tax ID number, we weren't just moving money from one pocket to another. We were moving it out of the reach of the marital estate. We were taking it off the table before Linda or David Thompson even knew the table was set. 10 minutes later, the money was gone from my personal account. My balance showed a few $1,000s, my normal checking account stuff, but the 3.2 million was now sitting behind a legal fortress that Patricia had built. I walked out of that bank feeling 10 feet tall. I called Patricia from the parking lot. The eagle has landed, I told her. I know it sounded cheesy, but I didn't care. Good, Patricia said. Her voice was sharp and professional. I'm filing the divorce papers at the courthouse in 10 minutes. Marcus is already in position near your house. He has a process server with him. They're going to wait until 2 p.m. to make sure you're nowhere near the property. Where are you going? I'm heading to that hotel we talked about, I said. I can't be there when she gets the papers. I don't think I could handle the look on her face, and I don't want to give her any reason to claim I'm being aggressive. Smart man, Patricia said. Stay off your phone. Don't answer her calls. Let the lawyers do the talking from here on out. You've done your part, Robert. Now go get some rest. I drove to a hotel about 30 miles away, a nice place by the river. I checked in under my own name, but I felt like a fugitive. I went up to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and just stared at the wall. I thought about Linda back at the house. She was probably on the phone with Thompson right now, maybe checking her own bank app to see if the money had hit. She'd see it wasn't there and she'd probably start panicking. She'd think HR had messed up. She'd probably call Margaret Chin. What she didn't know was that while she was waiting for a deposit, she was about to get a delivery. At exactly 2:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. It was a photo of our front door. A man in a plain suit was standing there, holding a manila envelope. 2 minutes later, another text came through, papers served. Subject is in shock. I'm staying on site to make sure she doesn't try to move any furniture or valuables. You're clear. I lay back on the pillows and closed my eyes. It was over. The marriage I'd spent nearly half my life building was officially dead. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel like I'd won a prize. I just felt empty. I thought about all those years of hard work, the times I'd stayed late at the office so we could afford the big house, the times I'd pushed through being tired just to make sure she had everything she wanted. It all felt like a waste. But then I thought about the recording in the shower. He's a simple man. He's clueless. The emptiness started to fill back up with a different feeling. Justice. I wasn't being mean, I was being fair. I was protecting the man who worked for 30 years from the woman who wanted to rob him in 30 seconds. Around 3 p.m., my phone started blowing up. Linda called. Then she called again. Then she sent a text. Robert, where are you? There's been a horrible mistake. Some man just came to the door with divorce papers. This isn't funny. Call me right now. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, Robert, I know you're upset about something, but we need to talk. Why would you do this? I love you. Please come home so we can straighten this out. I laughed at that one. She loved me? She loved the 3.2 million. She loved the idea of half of it. She didn't love the man who sat across from her at dinner every night. If she loved me, she wouldn't have been in a hotel room with David Thompson. Then the tone of the text changed. She must have realized the money wasn't coming into the joint account. What did you do with the retirement money? I called the credit union and they said you moved it. That's our money, Robert. You can't just hide it. My lawyer says this is illegal. I finally sent one text back, just like Patricia told me to. All communication must go through my attorney, Patricia Morrison. Do not contact me again. Then I blocked her number. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Patricia called me to say that Linda's lawyer had already called her. It wasn't Thompson. He was a consultant, not a courtroom lawyer, but it was someone he'd recommended. Patricia said the guy sounded like he'd been hit by a truck. He was demanding to know where the money was and threatening to file motions for emergency asset freezes. Let him file whatever he wants, Patricia told me. By the time they get a judge to look at this, we'll have the evidence of the affair and the financial conspiracy on the desk. They're playing catch-up, Robert. And they're losing. That evening, Marcus called me with an update. He was still sitting down the street from the house. She's packed a bag, he said. She's leaving. She looks like she's been crying for 3 hours. David Thompson showed up about 20 minutes ago. They had a huge fight in the driveway. I couldn't hear everything, but she was pointing at the house and screaming at him. He didn't look happy. I think he realized that his big payday just went up in smoke. I felt a little spark of satisfaction hearing that. Thompson wasn't in this for love. He was a vulture. And vultures don't stick around when there's no meat left on the bone. He'd promised Linda a huge settlement, and now he was looking at a long, expensive legal battle that he was probably going to lose. I stayed in that hotel for 3 days. I ordered room service, watched old movies, and finally, for the first time in months, I slept through the night. I didn't have to worry about what Linda was saying on the phone. I didn't have to worry about passwords or gym schedules. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was safe. On the 4th day, I met Patricia at her office. She had a big stack of papers on her desk. We've got them, Robert, she said. She looked like she'd just won the lottery. Marcus found more than just the hotel photos. He found emails between Linda and Margaret Chin. They were talking about the retirement package months ago. Margaret was telling her exactly how to phrase things to make it look like you were financially abusive, so they could argue for a bigger slice of the pie. It's all right here. It's not just a divorce case anymore, it's a conspiracy to commit fraud. She told me that Morrison Engineering had already been notified about Margaret Chin. The company was horrified. They'd already suspended her and were doing an internal audit. Dave from IT had helped them find the digital trail she'd left behind. Margaret was toast. She'd lost a 20-year career for a guy who probably wouldn't even pay for her lawyer. And Linda? I asked. She's scared, Patricia said. Her lawyer realized that if this goes to trial, we're going to bring up the adultery and the fraud. In Virginia, that can be a death sentence for a divorce settlement. We're offering her a deal. She gets 40% of the house and the joint savings, she keeps her own retirement, and she gets her car. but she doesn't touch a single penny of your retirement package. And in exchange, we don't press criminal charges for the fraud and we don't make the affair public. I sat back and thought about it. 40% of the house was still a lot of money. She'd walk away with several $100,000. Part of me wanted to fight for every cent. I wanted her to have nothing. I wanted her to feel what I felt when I stood on that staircase. But then I thought about the bridge. A good engineer knows when a project is finished. You don't keep adding weight until it breaks. You build it to stand and then you walk away. I didn't want to spend the next 3 years of my life in a courtroom, reliving every lie she told me. I wanted my peace. I wanted to start my new life. Tell her she has 48 hours, I said. After that, the deal is off the table and we go for everything. The wait for her answer was the longest 2 days of my life. I went back to the house to pick up some of my clothes and my tools. The place felt different. It was cold and quiet. I walked up that oak staircase and I didn't feel the ghost of our Christmas photos anymore. I just saw a flight of stairs. I packed my bags, loaded my woodworking tools into my truck, and I didn't look back. The call came on Friday afternoon. She signed it, Patricia said. She's gone, Robert. The house is being put on the market next week. You're a free man. I hung up the phone and sat on the tailgate of my truck. I looked at the mountains in the distance. I had my money. I had my tools. I had my dignity. Linda had her 40% and a guy who probably wouldn't call her back. It wasn't the retirement I dreamed of when I was 40, but at 62, it was exactly the one I needed. But there was one last thing I had to do. I had to see her one more time to sign the final property transfer papers. Patricia said we could do it in her office with lawyers present so there wouldn't be any drama. I didn't want to go, but I knew I needed that final bit of closure. I needed to look her in the eye one last time, not as a simple man, but as the man who saw through her. Walking into that lawyer's office for the final meeting felt like I was finally reaching the summit, but instead of a beautiful view, I was just looking at a room full of ghosts and paperwork. I had spent nearly 30 years with Linda, and it was all about to end with a few strokes of a cheap ballpoint pen. It's a strange feeling, knowing that the person who shared your bed and your breakfast table for decades is now just a name on a legal document. I wasn't the simple man she thought I was anymore, but I wasn't the happy husband I used to be either. I was just Robert Mitchell, a man who had survived a storm and was ready to find some dry land. The morning of the signing was a crisp, clear day in Virginia. I woke up in my hotel room and realized it was the last time I'd have to wake up wondering what the lawyers were going to say. I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my keys, and drove toward the downtown area where Patricia's office was. As I drove, I passed by some of the familiar spots. The park where we had our 10th anniversary picnic, the Italian restaurant where we celebrated my 50th birthday. Usually, those memories would make me smile, but that morning they just felt like old movies I'd seen 1,000 times. I didn't feel angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out and left behind something cold and hard like the steel I used to work with at the engineering firm. When I walked into the lobby of Patricia's office, the air smelled like expensive coffee and old books. Patricia was there, looking as sharp as ever, and she gave me a small nod that told me everything was ready. She led me into the big conference room, and that's when I saw her. Linda was already sitting there, huddled in a chair at the far end of the long mahogany table. She looked different. She looked older somehow. The glow she usually had, the one she'd been getting from those trips to the gym and her secret excitement about the money, was completely gone. She looked like someone who had been caught in a lie and had run out of places to hide. Her lawyer, a younger guy who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, was whispering something to her. She didn't look up when I sat down. I took my seat across from her, and for a few minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of a clock on the wall and the rustling of papers as Patricia laid them out in front of us. It felt like we were in a church, but there was no comfort here, just the cold reality of a business deal. That's what our marriage had become to her in the end, a business deal that went wrong. Patricia started explaining the terms one last time. The house had already sold for $920,000. After the split, I was walking away with about $500,000 from the sale, plus my own 401k and, most importantly, the $3.2 million sitting safely in my trust. Linda was getting her 40% of the house equity and the joint savings, which was enough for her to live on, but it wasn't the fortune she'd been dreaming of. She was also getting her car and her own small retirement account. It was a fair deal, probably more than she deserved considering she'd tried to rob me, but I just wanted it to be over. Mr. Mitchell, if you'll sign here, here, and here, Patricia said, pointing to the yellow sticky notes on the pages. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name over and over, watching the blue ink soak into the white paper. Each signature felt like a brick being removed from a wall that had been pressing against my chest for a month. When I was finished, I slid the pen and the papers over to Linda. She hesitated for a second, her fingers trembling as she reached for the pen. She signed her name slowly, like she was writing a confession. When she was done, she pushed the papers back toward Patricia and finally looked at me. Her eyes were red and watery. "Robert," she whispered. Her voice was thin and shaky. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I'm really sorry." I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't see the predator or the woman in the hotel parking lot. I just saw a stranger wearing my wife's face. I wondered how we had gotten here. I wondered if there was a version of our lives where I hadn't come home early that day, where I'd handed her the money and she'd spent the next 10 years slowly bleeding me dry until I was a broke old man with nothing left. That version of me would have been happy, but it would have been a lie. "Why, Linda?" I asked. I didn't say it with anger. I was just genuinely curious. "Just tell me why. We had a good life. We had everything." She shook her head and a tear ran down her cheek. "I don't know," she said. "I felt invisible. You worked so much, Robert. You were always at the office or in the garage. David, he made me feel seen. He made me feel young again. It was stupid. I was stupid." "You weren't just being stupid," I said, and my voice was firm. "You were being calculated. You were planning to destroy me. You were talking to a guy about how to take my life's work while I was out there earning it for us. That's not a mistake, Linda. That's a choice." She didn't have an answer for that. She just looked down at the table. Her lawyer cleared his throat and stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. I stood up too, feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't wait for her to leave. I walked out of that room, down the hallway, and out into the bright afternoon sun. I stood on the sidewalk and took a deep breath of the air. It tasted like freedom. Over the next few months, the rest of the pieces fell into place. The house sold quickly, and I spent a week packing up the last of my things. I didn't take much, just my clothes, my favorite chair, and all my woodworking tools. I left the rest for the estate sale. Walking through those empty rooms was strange, but I didn't feel the sadness I thought I would. The house was just a building. The home was already gone. I bought a small house in the mountains of Virginia, about 3 hours away from my old life. It's a sturdy little place made of stone and cedar, sitting on a hill with a view of a valley that looks like a painting. It has 3 bedrooms, which is more than I need, but I wanted space for my kids to visit. Speaking of the kids, that was the hardest part. I had to sit them down and explain what had happened. They're in their 20s now, and they aren't kids anymore, but it still hurt them. They were angry at their mother, but I told them not to let that anger ruin their lives. They've seen her a few times since she moved to Florida to live near her sister, but the relationship is strained. They call me every Sunday, and they've already come up to the mountain to help me set up my new workshop. And then there was the news about the others. My old buddy Dave from IT called me one evening to give me the gossip. Margaret Chen, the HR lady, didn't just lose her job. Morrison Engineering actually pressed charges for the privacy violations. She ended up with a heavy fine and a permanent black mark on her record. She'll never work in HR again. As for David Thompson, the financial consultant, he got exactly what he deserved. It turns out that after I filed, a couple of other men who had been targeted by his services came forward. The State Financial Board launched an investigation, and they found a whole trail of shady deals and kickbacks. He lost his license to practice financial advising. Last I heard, he was facing a few lawsuits of his own. Without the promise of a big payout from my retirement, he dropped Linda like a hot coal. Vultures don't hang around when there's no feast. Nowadays my life is quiet, and that's exactly how I like it. I wake up when the sun hits my window, not when an alarm clock tells me to. I spend my mornings in my workshop, building furniture that I give away to the local veterans center or sell at the farmer's market. I'm currently working on a big dining table made of cherry wood. It's slow work, but I'm not in a hurry anymore. I have all the time in the world. Sometimes in the evenings I sit on my back porch with a glass of tea and watch the shadows stretch across the valley. I think about that oak staircase in our old house. I think about the man I used to be, the guy who worked 12-hour days and thought that as long as the bills were paid, everything was fine. I realize now that I was asleep in a way. I was so focused on building the bridge that I didn't notice the river was changing underneath me. But I'm awake now. I learned that the best revenge isn't making someone else miserable. It's making yourself happy. It's protecting the things you've earned and walking away with your head held high. Linda thought I was a simple man because I was kind and I worked hard. She thought that because I didn't play games, I didn't know how to win them. She was wrong. I played the long game, and I played it for the most important stake there is, my own peace of mind. I'm 63 years old now. I have a workshop full of tools, a mountain full of trails, and a heart that doesn't ache anymore. My retirement package isn't just about the $3.2 million. It's about the fact that I can look in the mirror and know that I didn't let them break me. I stood my ground, I used my head, and I saved my future. So, if you ever find yourself standing at the bottom of your own staircase, hearing a truth you never wanted to know, don't scream. Don't shout. Don't let your emotions drive the car. Just take a breath, turn around, and start building your defense. Because at the end of the day, the only person who can truly look after your future is you. I watch the sun go down over the mountains and I think about how lucky I am. I'm lucky I came home early. I'm lucky I heard that phone call. And I'm lucky that I had the sense to be the man I am. Life is good on the mountain. It's quiet, it's honest, and for the first time in 30 years, it's exactly what I want it to be. For more stories like this, do well to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. See you in the next video. Peace out.